Hi, welcome to Blood and Dice. I'm Dan, and in this series of podcasts I'll be discussing roleplay gaming, organising, playing and everything in between. As it's the first episode, I'll start at the very beginning, setting up a game to play. For those of you new to roleplay games, or even just dungeon mastery in general, this can be a particularly daunting endeavour. I guess I should go over a few terms to begin with as well, to help familiarise you with the terms and acronyms we might use throughout. So a Dungeon Master or Games Master is the person who runs the game, like a sort of referee cum narrator, who guides the players along the story, explains the setting, and acts as all the non-player characters, NPCs, the players might encounter. Most game systems, such as Dungeons&Dragons or Call of Cthulhu, are known as pencil and paper tabletop games, as the player's character information or stats are kept track of via a paper sheet, showing various information. Usually this takes the form of a numerical value such as strength, a strong character having a high value and a weaker one lower. These statistics have an effect which depends on the system's mechanics. For example, in most games of this type, the stronger your character is, the more damage they will cause during melee combat. The vast majority of these games use a variety of dice when a player attempts something that the DM decides has a degree of difficulty. The harder the action is to achieve, the more difficult the dice roll will be. Each game system uses their own mechanics for this, and some don't even use dice. In particular, Dread, which uses stackable wooden blocks, a famous brand name which rhymes with Wenger. I may well go through some of the game systems in a later episode if you're interested, but there are many different types of game system, as well as things like homebrews, which is when a DM develops his own system by modifying an existing system, like reskinning Dungeons and Dragons to fit a Fallout theme, or even coming up with something completely unique. However, for this episode, I will assume that you have at least a basic understanding of roleplay gaming, and go through the setup for organising a single session, or one-shot, for a generic game system. There are a number of things to consider, namely your player base and what games they're familiar with, what themes and styles of play they prefer. Ideally, you want a game which is enjoyable for all involved, both you as the DM and each of the players you invite. I myself, as a DM and a player, prefer a darker, horror-based game, full of psychological horror, building tension, and the fear of not knowing what you might be confronted with at any given moment. But of course, not everyone is like me. It is worth considering, if you know a wide variety of players, whether you are better letting the players select the game, or the game select the players, as it were. Once you know what sort of game you want to play, and an idea of the players you want to get involved, it now gets down to the nitty-gritty of working on plot and storyline. This can be as simple as using a pre-made module in which all the characters, locations and events have already been designed and listed for you as DM to throw at your players. It's entirely up to you whether or not you use these types of modules verbatim, or if you want to alter things like the stats of an enemy or the place names in the location. Sometimes these modules can be linked together to construct a campaign, or to provide inspiration for your own creations. The alternative is to create your own storyline from scratch, allowing for inspiration from various sources, and prepare the places and people your players might encounter on the way. It's up to you how long and deep you dive down this rabbit hole. Some DMs like to create entire worlds, unique pantheons of religion, nations and creatures for their players to ignore, whilst others just like to take a rough plot hook and wing it. Personally, I like to try and be as organised as possible, but it is impossible to foretell what your players may or may not decide to do until you're actually running the game. Most good DMs learn to improvise quite quickly. It does help to have resources available, such as random name generators for when your player asks the name of the generic market stall owner he's talking to. I will definitely go through plot creation and storyline in a separate episode, as there is so much to go through there. I'll also endeavour to give a list of various online resources available, such as the random name generator I mentioned earlier. With most plots, you want to have your players invested. You can achieve this in a number of ways, by including aspects of their character's backstory, having unexpected twists and subplots, but a major factor in running these types of games is pacing. Pacing is quite heavily dependent on the sort of theme of the game. For a slow-burning psychological horror, you can have relatively few actual combat encounters, but raise the tension by making them more difficult. There might only be one monster, but he is unkillable without a certain weapon, fighting on unstable terrain, or introducing some sort of turn limit before the building you're in collapses. Call of Cthulhu is very good at this style, as your players have to manage not only the physical damage that they might sustain, but also the mental strain of the otherworldly horrors that they come up against. Once you have the game system and the plot down, then it comes to actually running the game itself. Keep in communication with your players and find out when they're available to play. For a one-shot game, this is generally quite easy to do. Schedule a date and time, let the players know how long you aim to run the session for. Multi-session games and full campaigns take a lot more planning, and I advise both players and DMs to keep decent notes during and soon after the game in order to keep track of things. Sometimes you might have to reschedule sessions to fit around your and your players' life and work. It might be good for all of you to use an app such as Google Calendar for this, so that each of you can see when each of you will be available. Otherwise, just keep in contact and don't lose your notes.